In this video today, we're talking about how VASCAR works in a criminal case, usually criminal speeding, but it is something that we see in other civil tickets as well. It is a little bit of an old, kind of antiquated technology in my opinion, but the police still use it all over Arizona. So let's take a look at how it works. First of all, VASCAR. It stands for Visual Average Speed Computer and Recorder. And really the way that it works, it's not super complicated. It's essentially a stopwatch. A lot of the police will have a stopwatch or they'll have a device in their car that is called VASCAR, but it all operates by the same principle. Here's how it works. What the police will do is they'll have a spot of roadway and they will know the distance between two certain points. So for example, on this stretch of roadway, they'll have a spot in the road that's either a bridge or they'll have a painted line on that area or they'll have a milepost or some sort of area where they can actually measure the start. They can say, this is where we're going to start our stopwatch. Then they will have another point at the other end that will be the end point. Same concept. They'll have it marked so they can see it clearly. Then they will know the distance between those 2 points. So they'll know that approximately 600 feet or 1,000 feet exists between point A and point B. The police will then sit at a spot where they can see the full area. Sometimes they'll do this by air, sometimes they'll do this from a hill, sometimes they'll just do this right on the side of the road. And what they'll do is they'll say, all right, if they know the distance between here and they measure a vehicle's time, how long does it take from a vehicle to start at one point and stop at the other end point? So if they know that it takes somebody 10 seconds and they know that this distance is what it is, then they can do a calculation. It's called time over distance. So speed equals time over distance. So if they can say that this distance was a certain distance and the person crossed that distance at a certain within a certain time, then they can calculate that person's speed. And based on the variables here, based on the distance and the time, they can determine whether or not that person was actually speeding. You just plug it into a formula, time over distance, and boom, you'll have the person's miles per hour. The issues here predominantly are a couple. Well, one is officers may or may not have the best accuracy in terms of how they start and stop a stopwatch. That's really what it comes down to. This is not like a radar gun or a laser gun where it's technology that's really helping them make these determinations. An officer is watching vehicles go and they're starting a stopwatch or they're clicking something in their vehicle that starts the timer. Then when it gets to the other side, they stop the timer. So if they're short or if they're long or if they're just not accurate, and they can't see things appropriately, or they're not able to make that determination as to when it passed this point or left this point, their number can be off pretty significantly. The other issue that we see quite frequently is that these the logs, the calibrations, any of the records that are associated with this particular VASCAR device, they're just not very good. They're not in good working order. This is old technology. It's not something that is often up to date in a lot of police vehicles around Arizona, and so it can be a little bit iffy. We've had cases where officers were saying that their devices just simply weren't working, or half of the modes weren't working, only one half was working, and they were only using the half that was working, but because of the fact that the entire device did have some problems, we've gotten not guilty verdicts on criminal speeding cases and reckless driving cases because an officer didn't use VASCAR properly. So that's how it works. Now VASCAR, as I said, it's not as common as laser or radar, but it does exist, so it's important to know how it works. A lot of the times we'll see this for air patrols, which are usually civil cases, but that's how that works. In a criminal case, you're entitled to get all the records associated with that device. So you're able to get the logs on the VASCAR, you're able to get the measurements, the distance, you're able to see when those items were taken out of service. The timing needs to be correct. It's a stopwatch, so it needs to be authenticated and calibrated to make sure that the stopwatch is keeping accurate time, because it matters. If a stopwatch is running fast or running slow, all of the measurements are going to be outdated. Similarly, if an officer has a bad line of sight, or if the officer misses a vehicle, meaning there's one vehicle that was white, there's another one that's a light gray, and the officer gets them confused, or sometimes what we'll see is the road is not straight like that, it's actually curvy, it actually goes like this, and so an officer will be seated here, and he'll be able to see the start here and the stop here, but can't really explain what happened here. And so that can lead to a big issue in a criminal case because line of sight, the ability to follow one person from the beginning to the end, make sure that they are identifying the right vehicle, those all may be issues. So if you've been charged with a criminal speeding case, it may not be VASCAR, but if it is, give us a call. We'll walk you through how this works, what evidence we can request. We can interview these officers. We can do a very thorough review of the case and see what they have and see what we can do to make sure that you are not getting a conviction on your record for a criminal speeding or a reckless driving case. Thanks for watching.